By early 1943, the United States Army Air Forces had committed to a bold and costly strategy: daylight precision bombing over Nazi-occupied Europe. Unlike the Royal Air Force, which relied on night raids to limit losses, American doctrine insisted on hitting industrial and military targets in broad daylight. The reasoning was simple: precision could cripple the German war machine, destroy aircraft factories, oil refineries, and transportation hubs, and weaken the enemy's capacity to fight on multiple fronts. But the reality in the skies over Europe was far more brutal than any strategic plan could anticipate. Early missions were plagued by a confluence of deadly challenges. Anti-aircraft artillery, or flak, lined the approaches to key industrial cities. These batteries fired at predictable altitudes, but their density was overwhelming. Black plumes of exploding shells erupted around formations, shredding wings and tearing fuselages. Fighter opposition was constant. The Luftwaffe, though stretched across multiple fronts, had perfected interception tactics against slow, lumbering bombers. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s would climb to meet the American formations, diving at high speed to rake bombers with synchronized guns. Even the most technologically advanced systems on the B-17s offered only partial protection. The Norden bomb sight, a marvel of mechanical ingenuity, promised near-perfect precision at altitude. But its promise was contingent on calm, steady flight. Any evasive maneuvers to dodge flak or fighters would throw off calculations. Gusts of wind, cloud cover, and the trembling of metal under fire made near impossible what was advertised as precise bombing. The results were staggering. Missions designed to destroy ball bearing, plants or synthetic oil refineries often delivered bombs, scattered across fields and villages miles from the intended targets. Psychological strain added another layer of complexity. Crews faced long hours in unpressurized freezing cabins, oxygen masks pressed against faces, gloves soaked in ice, and the constant vibration of engines created conditions of fatigue before the first engagement. Each bombing run carried the knowledge that a single burst of flak or a surprise fighter attack could be fatal. Letters from home and photographs of loved ones offered motivation, yet the weight of responsibility and the specter of death lingered over every formation. Key raids underscored both the ambition and peril of daylight operations. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission in August 1943, aimed at crippling German ball-bearing production, highlighted the deadly trade-offs of doctrine. Of the 376 bombers dispatched, 60 were lost, and many more returned heavily damaged. Despite the losses, the strategy pressed forward. Accuracy was improving, but only incrementally. Commanders and crews alike began to understand the limits of conventional tactics. Tight formations, once seen as protective against fighters, became vulnerable when flak concentrations were dense. Bomb sites, no matter how advanced, could only calculate so much when the aircraft shook and twisted under fire. American airmen and leaders faced a grim arithmetic. To achieve the precision necessary to justify daylight bombing, they needed innovation, both in technology and in the approach itself. The question of survival and success loomed large over every briefing. Pilots debated angles of approach, altitudes, and formation spacing. Bombardiers experimented with minor adjustments to release techniques. Ingenious minds on the ground proposed variations that at first glance seemed counterintuitive. Why not angle the bomb run? Why not attack not straight on but from the side, using wind, speed, and formation geometry to improve the bomb pattern? It was this combination of technological limitation, human endurance, and operational urgency that set the stage for a tactical breakthrough. American bomber crews were about to confront one of the most vexing problems of aerial warfare: how to deliver destruction with accuracy without inviting annihilation in return. The solution would demand courage, adaptation, and a willingness to abandon long-held doctrine in favor of a new, radical method. This preparation of environment, danger, and mental pressure naturally leads to experimentation and early development of what would become the sideways bombing technique. By late 1943, the American daylight bombing campaign had reached a pivotal point. Lessons learned from costly raids like Schweinfurt-Regensburg had exposed the limitations of rigid tactics. Crews returned with stories of bombers struggling to maintain formation under flak bursts, of Norden bomb sites thrown off by turbulence, and of bombs that missed their targets by miles. Commanders realized that traditional head-on approaches, which had relied on sheer formation density and the famed combat box to ward off fighters, could no longer guarantee success or survival. The challenge was twofold. First, improving accuracy meant finding ways to compensate for flak, wind drift, and evasive maneuvers. Second, reducing losses required crews to minimize exposure to concentrated German defenses. On the drawing boards of air bases in England, officers and bombardiers began to explore unconventional ideas. One such proposal was radical for its time. Instead of flying directly toward the target and releasing bombs in a straight line, bombers could approach at an oblique angle, releasing munitions sideways across the target area. This method promised multiple advantages. Angled runs could exploit crosswinds to spread bombs in a controlled pattern, increasing hit probability. It allowed formations to stagger releases, reducing overlap and improving safety margins between aircraft. Furthermore, by avoiding predictable head-on approaches, bombers could decrease the effectiveness of flak concentrations in enemy fighters, forcing defenses to react to unexpected angles. Early theoretical calculations suggested that, if executed precisely, this technique could significantly improve both accuracy and survival rates. Pilots and bombardiers were initially skeptical. Years of training had emphasized straight-line approaches and tight formations. Altering angle, timing, and altitude required rapid adaptation under high-stress conditions. Bombardiers had to relearn timing on the Norden bomb site, adjusting for new vectors. Formation leaders had to coordinate complex patterns to prevent mid-air collisions, all while maintaining radio silence under enemy observation. Still, desperation bred ingenuity. Small-scale trials were conducted on less defended targets, testing side-angle approaches under varying conditions of wind, altitude, and visibility. It was during these experimental raids that the first signs of success appeared. Bomb patterns became noticeably more concentrated, and loss rates declined marginally. Reports circulated among the 8th Air Force. Crews noted that bombs landed closer to industrial buildings, fuel depots, and rail yards than in previous straight-line missions. Word spread quickly. Something as simple as changing the angle of attack could have transformative consequences. The innovations were not purely mechanical. Leadership played a decisive role in fostering adoption. Visionary commanders, including Brigadier General Curtis LeMay and his staff, began to champion new tactics, insisting on rigorous training and precise execution. LeMay, already known for his unorthodox but results-driven approach, recognized that the war in the air demanded more than courage. It demanded adaptability. His insistence on disciplined practice runs, simulations, and meticulous calculations created an environment where side-angle bombing could evolve from theory to operational reality. By the end of 1943, the stage was set. The combination of technological limitations, enemy adaptation, human endurance, and leadership innovation had converged. Bomber crews were about to implement a tactic that would redefine daylight bombing, the oblique or sideways drop. Accuracy would triple, losses would decrease, and the lessons learned in these skies would influence air combat doctrine for decades. The story now shifts from preparation to perspective. To fully understand why this innovation succeeded, it is necessary to examine it from multiple angles: human, technological, tactical, leadership, and enemy responses. Each perspective illuminates the complex interplay that made sideways bombing not just possible, but revolutionary. For the men aboard the B-17s, the sky was both a workplace and a battlefield. Daylight raids demanded more than mechanical skill. They required nerves of steel. Crews faced freezing temperatures, oxygen deprivation, and the constant threat of death from flak bursts or fighter attacks. The introduction of the sideways bombing technique demanded an additional layer of mental acuity. Pilots had to master new approach angles, maintain formation integrity while flying diagonally toward targets, and calculate releases with split-second precision. Bombardiers, in particular, bore immense responsibility. The Norden bomb site, once calibrated for straightforward runs, now required complex adjustments. Misjudgment of angle, wind, or altitude could scatter bombs miles from the intended target, or worse, endanger fellow bombers. Letters home and memoirs from airmen describe the tension of those critical moments. "We were threading needles in the sky," wrote one bombardier, "but the angle gave us hope. More hits, fewer losses." Crew cohesion became paramount. Trust and communication could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. The psychological impact was profound. Success with sideways drops boosted morale, instilling a renewed sense of control over outcomes. Men who had doubted the tactic began to embrace it, recognizing that adaptation and courage were inseparable. At its core, sideways bombing was a tactical innovation designed to maximize accuracy and minimize exposure. Traditional straight-on runs concentrated bombers in narrow corridors, creating easy targets for flak batteries and predictable patterns for enemy fighters. By approaching obliquely, formations distributed their bombs across the target in controlled arcs, exploiting crosswinds to create denser impact zones. Formation leaders played a critical role in coordinating the timing and spacing of releases. Bombers staggered their approaches, releasing at slightly offset intervals to prevent mid-air collisions and optimize coverage. This required meticulous planning and precise execution, often rehearsed in mock flights over England before actual raids. Mission briefings became intricate, including wind speed calculations, altitude adjustments, and synchronization of multiple aircraft wings. The result was a remarkable improvement in bombing efficiency. Targets that had previously survived repeated missions with minimal damage were now being hit with unprecedented precision. Tactical success became measurable, bomb patterns shrank, target strikes increased, and flak losses began to decline. The sideways technique was inseparable from the tools of the trade. The Norden bomb sight, a marvel of mechanical engineering, could translate altitude, speed, and wind into a precise drop point, but only when properly aligned. Traditional straight-line runs simplified its calculations. Oblique angles introduced new variables. Bombardiers had to adjust for slant range, crosswinds, and angular velocity. Errors of mere seconds could mean bombs landing hundreds of feet off target. Aircraft themselves imposed limits. The B-17 was rugged but heavy, and flying diagonally in tight formation required exact control to prevent collisions. Pilots had to anticipate lift and drag differently, and gunners adjusted their fields of fire to avoid firing across adjacent bombers. Modifications to sighting equipment, minor tweaks in cockpit instrumentation, and rigorous practice all converged to make sideways bombing viable. Technology alone was insufficient. It demanded coordination with human skill and tactical planning. The marriage of mechanical precision and adaptive thinking became the defining feature of this innovation. Behind every successful innovation in the skies was a commander willing to challenge convention. Brigadier General Curtis LeMay, later renowned for his decisive leadership in strategic bombing, understood the limits of traditional doctrine. He recognized that brute force and rigid formations were insufficient against well-defended targets. Instead, he emphasized rigorous training, meticulous planning, and a willingness to adopt unconventional tactics. LeMay's leadership transformed the sideways bombing technique from experimental theory into operational reality. He insisted that every crew member understand not just their role, but the geometric logic of oblique runs. Briefings became more detailed, focusing on angles, timing, wind calculations, and formation integrity. He pushed pilots and bombardiers to rehearse over practice ranges, ensuring the complex choreography of oblique runs became second nature. Leadership in this case was not merely command. It was the deliberate cultivation of precision, trust, and adaptability under pressure. German defenses responded swiftly to daylight raids. Flak batteries were densest around key industrial zones, while the Luftwaffe maintained agile fighter units ready to intercept formations. However, the sideways approach disrupted their calculations. Anti-aircraft gunners trained on predictable straight-line bombing runs now faced oblique angles, complicating timing and lead distances for shell bursts. Fighters had to anticipate bombers crossing diagonally, often arriving too late to inflict significant damage. Intelligence reports noted the sudden improvement in American accuracy and the corresponding reduction in losses. German planners struggled to adapt, recognizing that the Americans had turned the geometry of the sky into a weapon itself. What had been a defensive advantage now posed new dilemmas. How to defend against a constantly shifting vector of attack. The introduction of sideways bombing had profound effects on crew morale. Early missions were tense as men adjusted to new angles and release procedures. Yet as reports of successful hits and safer returns circulated, confidence grew. Airmen who had once dreaded straight-line attacks now approached missions with renewed determination. This psychological shift was not trivial. Warfare in the air tested nerves as much as skill. Knowing that a calculated adjustment could triple accuracy and improve survival rates gave crews a tangible sense of agency. Letters and diaries from the period reflect this. Airmen described an almost mathematical reassurance in the oblique runs, a belief that careful execution could bend the chaos of battle to their advantage. The benefits of sideways bombing were not confined to a single raid. Once integrated into training and doctrine, the technique reshaped the American strategic bombing campaign. Accuracy improvements allowed planners to assign fewer bombers per target while achieving greater destructive effect. This efficiency reduced attrition, preserved experienced crews, and maintained operational tempo against German industry. Moreover, the successful implementation of the tactic sent a clear signal. Innovation, adaptability, and courage in execution could redefine air combat. It became a model for future modifications in bombing doctrine, influencing approaches in subsequent campaigns over Germany, the Pacific, and beyond. The first major mission to fully implement the sideways bombing technique occurred in early 1944, over a heavily defended industrial target in central Germany. It was a bitter February morning, the sky a pale steel gray and visibility limited by low clouds. The 8th Air Force dispatched a formation of nearly 100 B-17 flying fortresses, their silver fuselages reflecting the dim light as they climbed toward the target. Every crew member was acutely aware of the danger. Flak concentrations over the Ruhr had claimed dozens of bombers in prior raids. Lieutenant James Porter, now seasoned by months of missions, piloted his aircraft with precise control. Unlike previous straight-line approaches, his bomber entered the formation at a calculated oblique angle. Flanking planes mirrored the maneuver, creating a staggered attack corridor designed to maximize bomb pattern density while minimizing exposure to concentrated flak. The air vibrated with engines and the tense murmurs of crew members adjusting their instruments, checking altitudes and monitoring radio communications. The Norden bomb site required meticulous recalibration. Bombardiers adjusted for angle, wind, and the new velocity vectors. One miscalculation could scatter bombs across farmland instead of factories, or worse, endanger adjacent aircraft. As the formation approached the target, bursts of black flak erupted from German batteries, sending shrapnel streaking through the sky. Pilots veered slightly to avoid the heaviest concentrations, trusting the oblique calculations to maintain accuracy. From the cockpit, the city below appeared chaotic. Smoke from previous raids mingled with morning fog, and the glint of industrial roofs was intermittently obscured by bursts of flak. The sideways approach gave the formation a staggered, flowing appearance, almost organic in motion, as if the bombers were weaving a deadly pattern across the target. Bombardiers synchronized their releases, each plane's payload arcing through the sky in calculated precision. The results were immediate and unmistakable. Factories previously resilient under straight-line attacks now bore concentrated damage. Roofs caved in, assembly lines halted, and fuel depots ignited in synchronized eruptions of fire. The staggered, angled releases created overlapping impact zones, tripling the density of hits compared to previous missions. Bombers returned with fewer casualties, fewer damaged aircraft, and a palpable sense of triumph. Reports from the mission echoed throughout the 8th Air Force. Sideways bombing was no longer an experimental tactic. It was operationally effective. Commanders took note, analyzing post-raid photographs, bomb pattern assessments, and crew debriefings. The mathematics of angle, wind, and formation geometry, once theoretical, had proven decisive in the crucible of combat. Yet the mission was not without tension. German fighters, initially disoriented by the oblique approach, regrouped and attempted interception. Several B-17s faced strafing runs, but the staggered formation and unpredictable vectors complicated attacks. Anti-aircraft gunners, trained on predictable lines of advance, struggled to adjust their timing. Even amid flak bursts and enemy maneuvers, the bombers maintained cohesion, a testament to months of training and the human discipline underlying the innovation. As the last bombs fell and the formation turned for home, the sense of achievement was tempered by awareness of continued danger. The operation had validated the sideways technique. But every success carried reminders of the stakes. One miscalculation, one mechanical failure, and the sky could still become a graveyard. Yet for the first time, American bomber crews approached targets not with blind courage alone, but with a strategy that leveraged precision, human skill, and mechanical ingenuity in equal measure. This moment marked a turning point in the air war. Accuracy had been transformed, losses mitigated, and the balance between risk and reward redefined. The stage was set for successive raids to refine and expand the technique, proving that innovation, when executed with discipline and courage, could change the tide of aerial combat. Following the initial success, sideways bombing was applied in larger-scale missions across Germany, including strikes on key industrial cities, such as Schweinfurt, Leipzig, and Hamburg. February and March 1944 saw the 8th Air Force orchestrating raids with unprecedented precision. Crews flew long, perilous missions, sometimes over 500 miles, maintaining oblique formations designed to concentrate bombs on vital factories and refineries while minimizing exposure to flak and fighters. One notable mission targeted a synthetic oil refinery in Leipzig. Over 120 B-17s approached in staggered formations, each bomber assigned a precise angle and release timing. Anti-aircraft fire erupted as soon as the formation appeared on radar. Flak bursts tore across the sky, sending shockwaves through the wings and fuselages of aircraft. Pilots executed slight evasive maneuvers, adjusting for wind shifts while maintaining the oblique trajectory. Bombardiers, hands gripping Norden sights, calculated release points down to the second. The result? The refinery's key sections were struck simultaneously, fires breaking out across the plant, fuel lines ruptured, and storage tanks ignited in rapid succession. The effect was more than physical. Morale soared among crews who realized that these carefully calculated angled runs allowed them to survive missions that would have been deadly under traditional approaches. Flight logs from this period reveal a notable shift in confidence. For the first time, one bomber captain wrote, "I felt that if we did our part correctly, the bombs would find the target, and we would all come home." Loss statistics underscored the operational impact. Where previous straight-line missions had incurred 10–15% losses over heavily defended targets, sideways bombing reduced attrition rates significantly, sometimes halving casualties. The technique proved scalable, effective not only for small experimental raids but also for massive operations involving hundreds of aircraft. Commanders rapidly incorporated sideways drops into doctrine, adjusting training programs to include angle runs, staggered formations, and synchronized releases. The Germans, meanwhile, struggled to adapt. Flak batteries optimized for head-on attacks were less effective against oblique approaches. Fighter pilots had to recalculate interception vectors, often arriving too late to intercept bombers or only managing partial attacks. Intelligence reports from Luftwaffe headquarters noted the growing frustration. American formations had become unpredictable, precise, and more lethal than anticipated. Operationally, sideways bombing redefined American strategic air campaigns. Bombing patterns became denser, targets more consistently struck, and critical industrial infrastructure increasingly crippled. Successive missions demonstrated that innovation, discipline, and rigorous calculation could overcome what had previously been considered insurmountable barriers of flak, weather, and enemy defenses. Yet, even amid success, the cost of war remained stark. Not every aircraft returned. Crew losses, though reduced, were still a grim reminder of danger. But the strategic advantage gained through angled runs allowed the Allies to apply sustained pressure on Germany's war economy, contributing to eventual breakthroughs on multiple fronts. By mid-1944, sideways bombing had moved from experimental technique to standard procedure within the 8th Air Force. Its adoption was not merely tactical, it symbolized a transformation in aerial warfare philosophy. Precision, ingenuity, and adaptability could tilt the balance of a deadly contest high above enemy territory. The stage was set for the aftermath, assessment, consequences, and the reshaping of strategic air doctrine in the months and years that followed. The immediate consequences of adopting sideways bombing were striking. Post-mission reports from the 8th Air Force showed a dramatic increase in bombing accuracy. Previously, Straight-line raids over heavily defended targets yielded hit rates as low as 20–30% on key industrial objectives. Following the introduction of oblique drops, precision surged. Bomb patterns were tighter, critical installations suffered concentrated damage, and missions that had once been costly failures now achieved measurable strategic impact. Factories producing ball bearings, synthetic fuel, and aircraft components were struck more effectively, slowing production and straining the German war effort. Losses, though never eliminated, declined noticeably. The staggered, angled formations reduced exposure to dense flak zones, while oblique approaches disrupted the timing of Luftwaffe intercepts. Aircrew survival rates improved, preserving experienced pilots, bombardiers, and gunners who were essential for ongoing campaigns. For commanders, this meant more reliable operational planning. Fewer aircraft were lost to attrition, allowing successive missions to sustain pressure on German industry with increasing efficiency. Training programs were quickly adapted to embed the new technique. Crews underwent rigorous drills simulating oblique runs, emphasizing coordination, timing, and precise bomb release calculations. Officers prepared detailed briefings incorporating wind vectors, altitude adjustments, and formation geometry. The meticulous approach ensured that even new crews could execute sideways drops effectively, cementing the method as standard practice. The psychological impact was equally significant. Confidence among airmen grew with each successful mission. Whereas previous raids had been marked by fear and uncertainty, crews began to trust in their training, their instruments, and the innovation itself. Letters and diaries from the period describe a palpable shift. Men were no longer passive participants in perilous missions, but active agents shaping the outcome through skill and calculation. This improvement was not limited to individual raids. Strategic bombing doctrine evolved rapidly. Sideways bombing allowed planners to assign fewer aircraft to targets while achieving higher effectiveness. Reduced attrition rates meant that the same forces could sustain more frequent operations, striking multiple industrial centers in sequence. The combination of precision and efficiency amplified the overall effect on Germany's war production. Moreover, post-raid assessments showed that the technique had broader operational benefits. Flak damage reports indicated that fewer bombers were critically hit, and Luftwaffe interception attempts were increasingly unsuccessful. Sideways bombing disrupted German defensive calculations, forcing adaptations that ultimately could not fully counter the oblique approach. American crews had effectively leveraged both geometry and human coordination as a weapon, reshaping the battlefield above enemy territory. The operational success of sideways bombing would influence Allied air strategies beyond the immediate campaigns. Lessons learned informed later raids in Western Europe and the Pacific, establishing a precedent for combining tactical innovation, disciplined execution, and technological adaptation in precision aerial warfare. The wider ramifications of sideways bombing were felt both in the air and on the ground. German defenses, initially disoriented by oblique attacks, attempted to adapt. Flak batteries were repositioned and anti-aircraft tactics were recalculated to predict staggered release patterns. Luftwaffe fighter units experimented with new interception strategies, trying to anticipate diagonal approaches and staggered formations. Despite these efforts, American bombers retained a decisive edge. The combination of precise calculation, formation discipline, and human adaptability continued to outmatch German responses. Statistical analysis from mission reports highlighted the significance. Over a series of raids in early 1944, bomb accuracy tripled in comparison to prior straight-line approaches. Losses among bomber crews dropped by nearly half on heavily defended targets, while mission success rates rose dramatically. Factories producing aircraft, synthetic fuel, and munitions were crippled, forcing the German war economy into crisis. Infrastructure that had survived repeated conventional raids was now consistently damaged or destroyed. The adoption of sideways bombing also reshaped American air doctrine. Training manuals were revised to include oblique approaches as standard practice, emphasizing staggered formations, wind compensation, and precise timing. Commanders prioritized careful rehearsal and synchronization, ensuring that even newly trained crews could execute the tactic reliably. This disciplined approach became a hallmark of 8th Air Force operations, embedding a culture of precision, adaptability, and innovation. Personal accounts reflect the human impact. Crew diaries and letters describe a mixture of relief, pride, and renewed purpose. One bombardier wrote, "We finally had a way to fight back, not just with courage, but with skill and calculation. It felt like we had the upper hand." The psychological boost cannot be overstated. Airmen who had faced near constant fear in previous missions now approached objectives with confidence, knowing that the sideways technique improved both survival and effectiveness. Strategically, the ripple effects extended beyond individual missions. The improved accuracy and reduced losses allowed planners to allocate fewer aircraft per target while maintaining destructive effectiveness. This operational efficiency enabled sustained pressure on multiple fronts, contributing to the eventual degradation of German industrial capacity. Sideways bombing, initially a tactical experiment, had become a force multiplier, reshaping the balance of air power in Europe. Historians note that the technique's legacy endured long after the war. The principles of angled approaches, formation staggering, and integration of human skill with technological tools influenced post-war aerial tactics and the development of modern precision bombing strategies. What began as a desperate measure to save crews and improve hits became a blueprint for the future of air warfare. The success of sideways bombing stands as a testament to the intersection of courage, ingenuity, and disciplined execution. In the crucible of World War II, American airmen transformed a desperate tactical innovation into a strategic advantage, leaving an indelible mark on the conduct of aerial combat. In the cold, steel skies over Europe, innovation often meant the difference between life and death. Sideways bombing was born not from theory alone, but from necessity, a response to the brutal realities of daylight raids against a determined and well-armed enemy. It was a testament to human ingenuity, discipline, and courage, a convergence of precise calculation, mechanical ingenuity, and the resilience of air crews confronting nearly impossible odds. The technique transformed more than bombing accuracy. It transformed the airmen themselves. For the first time, crews could trust that skill and preparation mattered as much as courage. The staggered, oblique runs demanded concentration, coordination, and trust in one another. In doing so, they fostered a new psychological dynamic. Confidence born from competence, fear tempered by mastery. These men were not merely passengers of war. They were architects of the sky, shaping destruction with deliberate, calculated precision. Strategically, sideways bombing demonstrated that adaptability could rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. It forced the enemy to confront a moving, unpredictable threat, reshaping German defensive thinking. For the Allies, it became a force multiplier: fewer losses, greater destruction, and sustained pressure on vital war industries. It provided a template for integrating technology, human skill, and tactical innovation, lessons that echoed into the jet age and the modern doctrine of precision strikes. But beyond statistics and strategy, there is a deeper resonance. The story of sideways bombing is, above all, a story of human resilience in the face of overwhelming danger. It reminds us that war is not only a test of machines or firepower, but of ingenuity, courage, and the ability to adapt when survival and success hang by a thread. The B-17s, weaving their angled paths through flak and smoke, were more than instruments of destruction. They were symbols of an idea: that innovation, precision, and disciplined execution can bend even the chaos of war toward purpose. And in that moment, high above the German industrial heartland, American bomber crews rewrote the possibilities of air combat forever. This was not just a tactical evolution. It was a human triumph, etched into the skies of World War II.